A vampire and witch walk into a cafe, but the vampire has mommy issues and the witch hates her life, so maybe some fangs and blood will make everything suffice? Let's get into it. This week I'm adding Will It Hurt by Lily X to my sapphic shelf, and I would describe the book as a romantasy. And although this video will be a review of the book, there will be no true spoilers, and as I discuss the book, I'll be drawing the two main characters. Now, as to what you'll get out of this book review, I'll be discussing my predictions going into the book, giving commentary as I read the book, then ultimately I'll see what I didn't like, what I did like, and my overall rating, and hopefully by the end you'll want to add this book to your TBR. So when it comes to my predictions, I was weary of the fantasy aspect of the book because I do not normally read this genre, so I'm hoping the fact the main characters are a witch and a vampire don't take me out of the story. And from the synopsis, I can tell this is an enemies to lovers story, so I'm interested to see how a common ground or goal will bring these two enemies to become lovers. But the synopsis also says this story takes place over 4 nights, which will be impressive if the book makes me feel the romance is legit in only 4 days. So we'll see. I also, due to the marketing I've seen from this author on her own Instagram, predict that the spice levels might be higher. All in all, I'm excited to read a book from this author for the first time, as she's been on my radar for a while, and I'm also looking forward to expanding my reading by adding a fantasy book to my sapphic shelf. Now, as to the sketch I'm doing today, I'll be referencing the character art in the book itself, as the author does provide drawings of what the main characters look like. So for the sketch, I'm thinking having the main characters here in the middle, and then behind them drawing the house in which the witch lives in. The book actually has 2 descriptive pages describing the house, and so I thought it would be really cool to incorporate that into the sketch. And then at the bottom, I'm thinking of adding some of my favorite quotes from the book, so we'll see how it all turns out. Alright y'all, I'm 100 pages in, and I have thoughts. So quickly, I learned that the book is written through dual POVs, which I enjoy, but I did notice that a lot of the books I've read up until now that utilize this, for the most part, switch POVs almost every chapter. But with this book so far, it feels like the POVs change less frequently. Now that being said, I'm reading this on my Kindle, and the book is 376 pages long with 47 chapters. So the chapters move pretty quick, but I'll let y'all know at the end if I feel that every page was necessary. Now, something else I quickly noticed was the setting and how it was snowing, which seems like the perfect setting for an enemies to lovers storyline. And I've read enemies to lovers before, but not real enemies. Like, I genuinely hate your guts, you know what I mean? So the whole ice cold heart really takes on a literal meaning with this snow. Now, when it comes to first chapters in a book, the author has a responsibility to hook the reader in. And while I was reading this first chapter, I was confused at first, then I was like, what the is happening? And I currently definitely have more questions than answers. But I'm not mad. And the title of the book was actually mentioned in the first chapter, which was different. And there was a Natasha Lyonne mention, if you know, you know. Now, moving on, about 50 pages in, I realized that this book should have a trigger warning for suicide, and so I went back to the first few pages to check, and there indeed was a page with several trigger warnings mentioned, so definitely read that first before getting into the actual story. Here's how we're looking so far. So far, the fantasy elements are there, but when it comes to the romance, the main characters are not even in the same room until page 57, which is different for me. Now, I know people are against insta-lust, but like a previous interaction prior to page 57 would have sufficed. But remember when I said my first enemies to lovers was kind of vanilla? Well, these two main characters' first legit interaction is one trying to kill the other. Now, this is what I'm talking about. However, unfortunately, 100 pages in, this is the only interaction they have had. 100 pages, y'all. For a second, I was wondering if the romance would ever come, given the characters have to interact for, feelings to even start, but I digress. So my other first thoughts are that the world building was kind of too much for my liking, but I will say I did find myself getting into it even though I knew nothing of this world prior, which means the writing is good, since I caught myself also being upset that Isla forgot the invisibility spell. Like, bruh, how the hell could you forget that? Anyways. And I wanted a nice October read, and so far the vampires and witches are really doing that for me. And also, quick side note, there was a lot of words in this fantasy world that I wasn't familiar with, and I was wondering if it was just me, but then I saw a video online where this girl was saying she didn't want to read a fantasy book at the moment because of all the new words, and obviously I want to be reading this book currently, but it did make me feel less alone. Alright, here's another drawing update for y'all. At this point, my main characters, Isla and Jin, are slowly starting to come together. Now, although this book is mostly described as a romance, the other storyline in this book is attempting to bring a loved one back from the dead, and at the moment, I'm only really reading about the latter. So I do wish romance was more at the forefront. I'm not sure if this is common for genuine enemies to lovers books, but reading over 100 pages for the main character's second interaction is kind of pushing it for me. But if you like your romances to have other storylines that are essential to the overall plot, then this might be for you. For me personally, I don't mind this normally, but I prefer it when the books read more like a literary fiction, because at least the other aspects still feel human and realistic to me. But when so much of the book is based on a storyline deeply reliant on fantasy aspects rather than the love story of two main characters I can humanize, it takes me out of the story a bit. But I do not think I would suggest this book if that's what you were trying to do, because of how long it takes for that romance storyline to kick in. Now, that being said, the romance in this book kind of went from 0 to 100 real quick after being at 0.5 for the first 160 pages. I guess this could be explained to the influence that the main character's supersonic senses has on them, but the jump was still somewhat jarring to me. Y'all, I'm absolutely loving how the drawing is coming out at this point. I had to redo the nose several times, and also, yes, vampires can wear earrings. It's 2025, y'all. Let's be realistic. Now, some other things that stood out to me while reading is that a phone call happened between the two main characters, and I don't know why, but the concept of a phone call happening between a witch and a vampire is sending me. And then also, health and safety as a concept was mentioned as being a relatively new concept, which reminds me of when people were having a discussion on social media on how the older generations didn't see an importance in drinking water in comparison to the new young folks, but that's neither here nor there. So at this point in my drawing, it's time to work on the house that's going to go behind the main characters. So I actually took notes from the pages that described the house in the book. And as you see, here's kind of a summary of what I'm going for. So I want it to look like it's from the Victorian era, have some of that lattice work, some window shutters that kind of look cracked and run down, and just overall really capture what the author was going for. Now, I did actually have to research this as I'm not an architect. I didn't really know what most of this stuff meant or looked like. And then also, our witch Isla's dream job is starting a YouTube channel about making teas. My dream date. And she knows that. Also, it is safe to say that our vampire Jin has mommy issues, yet somehow these two do live happily ever after. But to see if I mean literally live forever, because you know, vampires are immortal, you'll have to read the book. Now, before I get into my likes and dislikes and overall rating, I want to touch on some of my favorite quotes from this book. All in all, I had about 12 quotes stick out to me, but I'll be choosing my favorite 3 to add to my art. And it was actually very hard to choose, as this book had some really great lines and some heavy themes as well. At this point, I was debating if I should write my favorite quotes in pen versus pencil, because I really wanted to have it stand out on the page, but I was scared I would make a mistake if I did it with pen, and so we ended up going with pencil. But the first one is, will it hurt? Saying nothing was the kindest answer. I feel like this one encompasses the book itself because of the title being in it, but also the impending doom and sadness that is kind of always lingering in the background in this book. Then my next quote is, I didn't care what was legal or ethical or peaceful. I chose this one because, as John Lewis spoke on, I do believe in causing some good trouble. And my third quote is Little Liar, because it captures the banter the two main characters have. Now, an honorable mention when it comes to quotes is one revolving prayer, which surprisingly religion was kind of a mini theme in this book. But the book was discussing how prayer was a false sense of security, but yet prayer is more familiar than hope, and that whole concept did stand out to me. Now I'm going to add some of the word choice used in the book as well to my art. Now, moving on to my dislikes in the book. The book did have a lot of sensitive subject matters and a lot of mental health talk, and I couldn't really decide whether or not I like how the book handled it. But please do be mindful reading this if you are currently in a sensitive headspace. Also, there were a few moments that for me were somewhat cringy because I don't love current trends, events, or things to be mentioned in my books. But for example, Indeed was mentioned, which could have had a trigger warning in itself. And also a sick Victorian child was mentioned, which seemed to be referring to that meme going around. And another dislike was that the book had doodles or drawings throughout the book, which felt a bit childish to me. And then my last dislike was, of course, how long it took to get to to the romance part of things, and then the quickness with which the romance bloomed, which ties into how much time was spent on the other storyline and the world building. But eventually I came to like the world building, even though it was lengthy, because the story did feel immersive in that sense. Now, when it comes to what I did like about the book, I liked that one of the main characters, Isla, is South Asian, and that she is described as not fitting into society's normal beauty standards, and how she comes to love herself anyways. I liked that therapy was mentioned, that the book had some cussing in it, that it spoke on work-life boundaries and balance, that it had themes of dysfunctional families, job burnout, religious trauma, and learning to walk in your truth, as both characters somewhat struggled with who they were versus who they wanted to be. And there were also some parts that were pretty funny. So, will it hurt reading this book? Definitely not. Overall, here are my ratings. But in my eyes, all sapphic books are 5 out of 5 stars because we want and need more of them. So go support this author, and I hope you buy and enjoy reading this book. Overall, I'm completely obsessed with how this drawing looks. I hope I did the characters justice, and I hope I did the storyline justice. I really enjoyed doing this. It was therapeutic, it was fun, it was calming, and it really just takes my mind into that world one more time, even though I'm done reading the book now. I'm already reading my next sapphic read, and I already have my book after that picked out as well, so make sure to subscribe if you don't want to miss out on that, and I'll see y'all in the future. As always, live, laugh, love, lesbian. Go read.